I should have known something was wrong when they asked my son to step away from the family photo. Just the bloodline boys, Uncle Ray said, his voice too cheerful to be genuine, his camera raised like a boundary line, not a lens. My husband Mark stiffened beside me. Our son, 14 years old, wearing the navy blazer Mark had picked just for today, froze mid-step. At first he smiled, expecting someone to say, "Of course your family." No one did. They just turned back toward the golden balloon arch that read, "Happy 75th, Granddad, our legacy, our light." It was supposed to be a celebration, a tribute to Richard Ashford, the patriarch who built an empire out of influence and connections. Gold-plated cutlery, imported orchids, a four-tier cake modeled after his political crest, champagne towers for the guests, and one conspicuous absence standing beside me, my son, Julian, holding a sealed envelope in one hand and nothing else. Not a gift, not a trust, not a name that carried weight. Because I married into this family after a scandal they never quite forgave. Because Julian is the son of a man they tried to erase. Because, in politics, even children are pawns. They called it a celebration of legacy. But legacy, I was learning, had borders, and my son didn't fall within them. The mansion pulsed with power. Lawmakers, local press, and half the city's elite buzzed around the room, trading toasts and predictions about which grandchild would inherit what. "Ethan's getting the Napa estate and a seat on the Ashford Foundation board," someone whispered. "Richard's nephew, practically raised like a second son. Elena's trust is already worth 7 figures. Another chimed in. "She's the youngest Ashford grandchild, barely 16. And Julian? He got lemonade in a paper cup. A head pat from a cousin who barely looked at him. And no mention in the tribute video playing on loop in the den. He sat quietly on the edge of an upholstered bench, straight-backed, polite. He'd worn Granddad's favorite cufflinks, the ones Mark passed down to him last year. He practiced his posture, his handshake, his "yes, ma'am," and "thank you, sir." He even wrote a speech. But when Granddad raised his glass for the official toast, no cue for Julian. No name. No nod. To legacy, the old man declared. To bloodline. To the children who carry the name with honor. What I've built, I pass only to those who carry it forward. The champagne flutes clinked. My heart cracked. I glanced at Mark, expecting fury. He stared at the floor, expression unreadable. But there was something in his silence, not weakness, but intent. Mark had made sure Julian carried that envelope. Not out of hope, but out of preparation. Not because he expected fairness, but because he anticipated this exact erasure. Julian wasn't blinking anymore. He wasn't tearing up either. He was watching. Watching the way Ethan stood to accept a scroll tied in gold ribbon, his estate declaration. Watching the way Elena unwrapped an engraved heirloom watch, passed down from Granddad's father to his eldest worthy. And then Julian did something I'll never forget.
He stood.
Mid-toast, mid-laughter, mid-grandfather's smug grin. And he walked, calmly, with quiet authority, to the head of the table, where Granddad sat surrounded by flattery, fine scotch, and the legacy he loved more than truth. He placed the thick envelope on the mahogany table, not carelessly, but deliberately, as if filing an official record. The room, for once, fell silent. "Granddad," he said, loud enough for the room to hush. "Dad told me to give this to you if you ever decided to forget I exist." Every champagne flute paused midair. For the first time, Granddad's gaze flickered, not toward Julian, but toward Mark. And Mark simply nodded.
Once.
Not in defiance, not in anger, but in quiet agreement, like a man who'd known this moment would come and had chosen his timing with care. Granddad squinted. "What is this, Julian?" Julian gave a small smile. "Sorry you forgot me today. This might help your memory."
Gasps.
Muffled laughter. A few phones quietly raised. Some guests leaned in. Others shifted uncomfortably, aware that something unscripted had begun. Granddad's hand trembled slightly as he opened the envelope. Inside, a notarized letter. A document, sealed and dated. He skimmed the first page. and his face turned ghost white. His hand gripped the edge of the table as he flipped to the second sheet. It was signed by his late wife, Julian's paternal grandmother, written the year before she passed. A letter that should have surfaced years ago but had been buried in a safety deposit box. A letter confirming the truth they tried to bury. That Julian was not a child born of scandal. He was the rightful bloodline. A son conceived within marriage. The son of their firstborn, my late husband, Mark's elder brother, the one they disowned for political reasons, and whose name they never spoke again. And with it an attached legal clause. A copy of an older version of Granddad's will. The version that included Julian by name. The version that had been deliberately replaced by Granddad himself, quietly and strategically, before any lawyer or court could intervene. The kind of clause that, in the hands of the right lawyer, could start a very real inheritance battle. Granddad's voice cracked. Where did you get this? Julian tilted his head. From my real legacy. He then placed an old photograph on the table almost like an afterthought. An old, yellowed photo. Edges curled with time. In it, a boy no older than 2, beaming in the lap of an elegant woman in pearls, Grandma Elise. Scrawled on the back in her shaky hand. In case the world forgets my Julian. And then, without a word, Julian walked back to his seat. He didn't need applause. He wasn't looking for tears. He just sat and waited for truth to do what truth always does. The silence in that dining hall wasn't awkward.
It was seismic.
Shock didn't ripple, it ruptured. You could hear the fireplace crackle. You could hear Mark inhale, finally looking up, and then Granddad whispered it low. Hoarse, stunned. No estate. No heirloom. Just your truth. He didn't even realize he was quoting Julian, because in that moment, the power shifted. And my son, my 14-year-old, erased, polite, lemonade-drinking son, became undeniable. I'm Eva Ashford. And if you believe justice doesn't need a gavel to echo, subscribe now. This rabbit hole, it only gets darker. Julian sat down like nothing had happened. Back straight. Eyes forward. Fingers calmly folded in his lap. But his presence was no longer small. It filled the room, like a ghost that had finally decided to speak. The whispering began immediately. Did you know? One cousin hissed. That letter. Was that real? Someone gasped again as Granddad stood. His napkin slipped to the floor unnoticed. The man who once ruled every table like a king now looked hollow, like something inside him had cracked wide open. He didn't speak. He didn't deny it. He just turned and walked out of his own 75th birthday party, like a king retreating from a throne that no longer belonged to him. The room exploded into motion. His assistant rushed after him. The estate lawyer, who had been sitting smugly 3 seats down, now looked like a man perched on a live grenade. And in the center of it all, Julian reached for his water, like it was just another Sunday brunch. Mark sat quietly, looking at Julian with eyes full of pride. And me, I should have felt victorious. But all I felt was the room closing in. The air turned thick. My ears rang. The chandelier above looked suddenly off balance, like it might fall. This wasn't just a birthday scandal. This was a fracture, a reveal. The kind of moment that doesn't just ruin dinner, it rewrites family history. Because what Julian brought to the table wasn't just a truth. It was proof.
And I knew something else.
That envelope Julian had delivered? It wasn't the only one. Back at home, hidden beneath sweaters in a locked drawer, was mine. My envelope. It wasn't notarized. It held no legal power. But it carried something far more dangerous. The truth. The story of how they erased Julian's real father, Mike, my late husband, from their records. How they turned his death from a tragedy into a cover-up. How they repackaged it into a PR campaign. Unstable. Disloyal. Volatile. All lies. All convenient. Buzzwords. Poisonous ones. They scrubbed his name from press releases. Edited him out of family albums. Rewrote entire chapters of our history. And when I cried, they paid my rent for a year. Sent hush money through anonymous trusts. Told me if I ever wanted Julian to be safe, truly safe, I'd keep his father's name buried with him. And I agreed. Because I was young. Because I was grieving. Because they threatened to take Julian. Mark was the only one who stood by me. He married me when no one approved. He gave Julian his name. He protected us both. But even he had limits. He never stood up to his father. Never confronted the legacy. Until now. After Grandad vanished into the hallway, Mark stood. He picked up his champagne flute, tapped it twice with his ring. The room froze. His voice didn't shake.
Didn't yell.
It sliced through the silence, like glass. I'd like to make a toast, he said. To my son, the boy you all pretend not to see. The boy who carried more truth in one envelope than most men here carry in their name. Someone scoffed. Uncle Ray, probably. Mark turned toward him. You said bloodline boys earlier, Ray. Maybe you forgot Julian shares the same DNA as your precious heir. Maybe you forgot my brother, his father, was your nephew too. He let it sink in. Maybe you all forgot that truth doesn't vanish just because you stop speaking it. Then he raised his glass. To Julian, my father's rightful grandson. My son, the future of this family, whether you like it or not. Julian blinked, just twice. Then the corners of his mouth curled upward. Not a smile, not a smirk. Something deeper. Recognition. Mark sat down. No one clapped. No one dared. But something shifted. I reached for Julian's hand under the table. He squeezed it back. And then, just before I thought the moment would pass, just before the next course was served and the guests could pretend again, Elena stood, holding her heirloom pocket watch. She walked across the room and placed it gently in front of Julian. If Julian's not family, she said, then neither am I.
Gasps.
Again, but not from surprise this time, from truth. She placed her heirloom watch down, walked over, and stood beside him. And that was the moment the table cracked. Not the wood, the performance, the illusion. Because legacy had just chosen its new center. By morning, the party had vanished. The ballroom emptied. The cake, half-eaten, boxed up and sent home with the staff. The imported orchids drooped in their vases, as if even they were exhausted from pretending. But the echoes remained. Of Julian's voice. Of truth, spilled like champagne. Of a legacy undone by a sealed envelope. They tried to keep the press out. But they failed. By dawn, headlines bloomed like bruises across the Ashford name. Ashford heir apparent disputed at 75th legacy dinner. Mystery grandson shocks the dynasty. If he's not family, neither am I. Mark didn't sleep. He sat by the window all night, holding the old photograph like it was a wound that wouldn't close. Elena had taken it from Richard and handed it to him, quietly, like a confession. His grandmother, my mother-in-law, cradling baby Julian in her arms, her handwriting still trembling on the back, in case the world forgets my Julian. And beneath it, barely visible. Richard never wanted to, but he had to. That's when I knew. I couldn't stay silent anymore. When Mike, my first husband, stood up to the Ashfords, they called him paranoid, said he was cracking under pressure, hallucinating betrayal. They made him out to be unstable. But I remember how he walked away from Richard's empire, how he built his own firm from nothing but conviction, how he refused to join the political party, how he refused to play along. And I remember how they hated that he married me, just a girl from a modest family, a soft voice, a plain degree.
Not one of them.
After the crash, they didn't just bury Mike. They buried his name. But Elise, his mother, never turned her back. Not on me. Not on Julian. She shielded us in ways I didn't even see back then. It was she who guided my match with Mark, quietly, deliberately. She knew I wouldn't survive this family alone. She knew Julian wouldn't, either. When she passed, she left me nothing in her will. Nothing but an envelope and a small gray box. I never opened this box. Not until now. Inside was a letter. Ava. I was complicit in Mike's erasure. Not because I wanted to be, but because I was too afraid to stop Richard. I stayed silent. I told myself it was to protect you and to protect Julian. But silence doesn't erase guilt. So I kept what I could. His evidence. His voice. You'll know when it's time. Taped to the back was a scratched old memory card. Still intact. Still waiting. That night, I didn't sleep either. We had returned to our apartment that afternoon. Far from the Ashford estate's marble, its curated perfection, its watchful eyes. For the first time in days, I felt a strange, unsettling relief. Like I could finally exhale. Just before dawn, I walked into Mark's study. The city stretched behind him. Glass, steel, and gray morning light. I played him Mike's final voicemail. The one no one knew I had. If they ever tried to erase Julian's name like they did mine, don't let them. Tell him I was never ashamed. Mark looked up at me, shaken, hollowed out. They'll destroy us for this, he said. They already tried. I told him. Now we destroy the lie. I didn't ask for permission. I sent the letter and the card to the only journalist Mike ever trusted, the one he said still believed the truth mattered. And then I stepped in front of the cameras. No handlers, no lawyers, no script. Just me, just truth. My husband, Mike Ashford, refused to join the Ashford political machine. He spoke up against corruption. He refused to look the other way. He died for that refusal. And they called him paranoid. Now, they're doing the same to our son. This. I held up the card. Is his voice. The real one. The world exploded. Ashford widow exposes dynasty secrets. Forgotten heir's mother breaks 15-year silence. Julian Ashford. The legitimate legacy? Uncle Ray panicked. Legal team scrambled. But Mark, my Mark, stood beside me. They silenced me once too, he said. Never again. Julian didn't speak much. He just sat there, eyes wide, watching his father's face move on the screen like a ghost breathing. I reached over, placing my hand over his. You don't have to fight the way he did, I whispered. But you deserve to live like he dreamed. He turned to me, voice quiet. I just don't want to be swallowed by their name. I smiled through tears. Then carry yours, I said. That night, Mark tucked Julian into bed, and I walked into the sitting room where Elise's photograph still stood on the shelf. Framed, quiet. She wore her pale green scarf and that soft smile, the one that never left her eyes. I stood in front of her for a long moment. Then, finally, I whispered, You gave me time. Now I've used it. And for the first time in years, I turned away, without fear. 2 days later, it came in the form of a message. A gold-trimmed envelope, left quietly on my side table by one of the house staff. I recognized the handwriting instantly. Years had passed since I'd seen it, but it still carried weight. Command. Legacy.
Guilt.
Inside just one line. Come to the study.
Tonight.
Alone. The Ashford estate at night was as hushed as a church after scandal. The marble echoed beneath my heels as I walked past portraits that no longer felt like family. When I opened the doors to the study, I found him there, Richard Ashford, my father-in-law, once feared.
Now aged.
He sat behind his desk, lit by the soft amber glow of a single table lamp. The room around him was shadowed, but his face, lined, hollow, was clear. His eyes met mine. No sharpness, no command, just grief, and something dangerously close to shame. Eva, he said, like the name hurt his throat. You look tired. You don't, I replied. I didn't sit. He nodded slowly, hands steepled. Mike warned me about the corruption. The backdoor deals, the kickbacks, the rot inside the walls of everything we built. He said, let it fall. Let it burn. I'll build something clean. My chest tightened. And what did you do? I asked. He exhaled like it cost him something. What I always did. I chose the structure over the soul. A pause followed. Still. Heavy. He didn't cry. Men like him don't cry. But his voice cracked. My hands were tied, Eva. I wasn't just complicit. I was involved. There were things.
Documents.
Recordings. People with leverage. I couldn't protect Mike, even if I'd had the courage to try. If I sided with him, I'd go down too. And they knew it. His voice frayed. But he kept going, as if silence now would be worse than truth. The board turned on me.
The party.
Donors. They said Mike was a liability. Paranoid. Disloyal. A man who wouldn't protect the name didn't deserve to carry it. He looked down. And he didn't finish. I tried to get Mike to understand, Richard said, his voice low. But he wouldn't. He couldn't see past the betrayal. He stared at his clasped hands. I tried the board, the party. I pleaded with them to see what he was trying to protect.
But they only saw threat.
Disloyalty. A bitter breath escaped him. And then I realized it wasn't just them. There were people inside my own family who helped twist the story, fed the fire, turned whispers into headlines. It moved faster than I could stop it. He paused, visibly swallowing something hard. I didn't stop it. I didn't protect him. And by the time I wanted to, I couldn't. He reached into the drawer and pulled out a slim envelope. As a last resort, I became part of the smear campaign. False stories, mental instability, erratic behavior. I didn't speak. I couldn't. Years later, I found out, like it physically hurt to say it. Ray pushed it further. Your Uncle Ray. His voice hardened. He orchestrated most of it. Fed me fake documents. Staged photos. Coached the press. He saw an opening, and he took it. He slid the envelope across the desk. It stopped just inches from my hand. This is an addendum. Julian is to inherit what would have been Mike's. Equal to Mark. It's signed, notarized. Final.
And
He hesitated, then continued. I've issued a public statement. Just an hour ago. A press release. I named Julian. Acknowledged him. Set the record straight. It's done. I still didn't touch the envelope. Do you think a piece of paper makes this better? No, he whispered. But maybe truth can start where silence failed. I finally sat down. Not for him. For Mike. For Julian. For the pieces of legacy that still deserve to live. He never wanted your empire, I said quietly. He just wanted to be seen. I know, Richard whispered. And I see him now. Too late, but I do. We sat there a long time. Not as enemies. Not as family. Just two people trying to name the ghosts they helped create. And when I rose, I took the envelope. Not for the money.
for the story.
As I stepped into the hallway, the portraits no longer loomed like ghosts. They were witnesses now. And for the first time in this house, silence didn't feel like erasure. It felt like reckoning. Julian would know who his father was. He would know who his grandfather failed to be. And he would know who finally had the courage to say it out loud. A tear slipped down my cheek before I could stop it. I turned the corner, and there he was, Mark, standing quietly beneath the chandelier, hands in his pockets, shoulders tight with something unspoken. His eyes flicked to the envelope in my hand, then to my face. We didn't speak, but for the first time in a long time, the silence didn't stretch between us. It held us. He stepped closer. Wordlessly, he slipped an arm around my shoulders, and I leaned into him. My head rested lightly against his shoulder, not because I was tired, but because in that moment, I didn't have to carry it all alone. No words were exchanged. None were needed. We stood there like that, not just as survivors of someone else's legacy, but as keepers of what remained. And for the first time in this house, silence didn't feel like erasure. It felt like home, because we were home, together. If this story stayed with you, if you believe some wounds deserve to be understood, not buried,
Subscribe.
more stories like this are waiting to be told.